Thank you. So please bear with me. This is my first meeting chairing the meeting, so I'll see how I go. But my apologies in advance if I go a little bit off. Who's doing the prayer? Okay, yep. So the blessing will be read by Councillor Islam.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. As always, I start with the blessings with God. May the peace and blessings of God be upon to you all in the chambers and those who are watching online. We always thank God for his blessings, and we ask God the Almighty to give us sincerity in all our actions. We're making a number of important decisions tonight, and I pray to God the Almighty that gives us the ability to make the right decisions for our city and its residents. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Islam. So record of attendance, we have Councillor Adams is joining online, and we have Councillor Emma Zhang is a leave of absence, which we will put through shortly, and the Mayor was also granted leave at the last OCM. Okay, we've gone out of order. Sorry, we have gone out of order. That's right. Yeah. Yes. No, sorry. It was okay. Record of attendance. The next item is disclosure of interest. So I have a disclosure of interest, which is in item 13.2.1. The disclosure is a direct financial interest, as the applicant of the item made an electoral gift to me in the 2021 election, which was declared by myself and the applicant. The value was $331.33 for an advertisement in a newspaper. Thank you. Are there any other disclosures of interest? Councillor Good?
Excuse me, Madam Deputy Mayor Williamson, just thought you may want to quote the disclaimer in case any issue. Just thought I'd be courtesy bring it up.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Good. Okay, so the disclaimer reads, members of the public are cautioned against taking any action on council decisions on items in which they have an interest until such time as they have seen a copy of the minutes of the meeting or have been advised in writing by the city staff. The recordings of the meetings, all council meetings are digitally recorded with the exception of confidential agenda items in accordance with section 5.23, Section 2 of the Local Government Act 1995, during which time recording ceases. Following publication and distribution of the meeting minutes to elected members, the digital recording will be available on the city's website. And I haven't done the acknowledgement of country. I've missed that as well. Do we have that? I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting of the traditional custodians on the lands of the traditional custodians, and I acknowledge their elders past and present. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us back. Sorry. That brings us back? Yep. Yep, so disclosure of interest. Are there any other disclosures of interest? No? Thank you. And the next item is item 5, reports of delegates. I don't have any. No, that's fine. Yeah. Reports of delegates. Councillor Dewhurst.
Thanks very much. So myself and Councillor Betts packed a swag and a tucker box and went down to Mandurah for a meeting for the Rivers Regional Council. And you'll be very interested to know that so the charter was approved by the Rivers Regional Council Committee, but they'll now need to be adopted by each of the councils. Once that occurs, the application for the creation of the Rivers Regional subsidiary will be done and submitted to the Minister for Local Government. Once he approves that, and we're hoping that will be sooner than later, the Rivers Regional subsidiary will be created, 60 days after the creation of the RRS. Transactions will cease for the RRC and its assets and liabilities will be transferred to the RRS. Following closure of the RRC, books and audits will be arranged. On receipt of the final audit and the RRC will be formally wound up. We anticipate the RRC will wind up and may occur in March 2025. So we've still got a bit of way to go. But some other news is, depends which way you look at it, either on the 16th or the 19th of September, we should be having our waste going to the waste facility in Kwinana, so it'd be quite exciting. Is it the 16th or 19th? Because I've sort of... I think it's the 19th. I think it is the 19th September. So, yeah, so it's quite exciting. So your rubbish will be starting to be burnt.
Thank you, Councillor Dewhurst. Are there any other reports of delegates? Councillor Lloyd?
Yes, I attended the Gosnells Armidale Landcare meeting on the 21st of August as the delegate on behalf of the city. The evening started with some unfortunate news that the newly appointed coordinator had resigned after just a short period, but interviews are underway and the hope is that they will have some good news to announce in coming weeks. The shot hole borer has been identified along the Canning River and very strong concern was raised about the management plan by DPIRD for what has been described as the COVID for our trees. Apart from the biodiversity impact and the heating impact for us that for our state can't be ignored. With just 16% tree canopy cover in the state, WA is already behind the rest of the country and this could set us back so much further. AGLG is calling for more transparency on the issue and a coordinated group of local government along with WALGA and key spokesperson to be appointed is what they're seeking. I think we can all agree that we need more intensive action regarding this disaster for our trees and we need it now. Updates closer to home in the city of Gosnells. Southern River Confluence has been continuing weed control and revegetation, which is an ongoing project. This project recently won the State Parks and Leisure Association Environmental Stewardship Award, that's a big one, and this will now go on to their national awards later this year. The city is planning to extend its seed saving project for a further 3 years, collecting native seeds to utilise for local planning projects. The long-awaited Friends Group manual is in draft form and will be able to provide guidance to residents wanting to start up a Friends Group. They hope once complete it will encourage more Friends Groups to establish across the city. And there's another evening bat walk coming up for the Merricarra wetlands, so keep an eye on their Facebook page for those dates. The biggest announcement for the night was that this season so far, the city has planted 40,000 seedlings, which I think is an awesome effort. And on a final note, the team were excited that their Facebook page now has 2,799 likes and have asked people to share it around the community so they can hit the 3,000 soon. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. Does any other councillors have any reports of delegates? No? Thank you. So we'll now move to question time for the public and the receiving of public statements. So the first item is question time. So we have quite a few questions come in tonight. So we will allow the questions. There are, if we get to the 15-minute mark, we can then work out from there whether there's any more questions after that. So the first question we've received is from Tracy O'Neill. If you could come up and speak.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The application for item number 13.2.3 on tonight's agenda, the transport depot and hard stand area on Victoria Road, doesn't have any times stipulated. Is it to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? And is that appropriate given that they will have to use the residential roads to get in and out of the property?
Thank you. I'll now hand that over to the Director of Planning.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, it would be 24/7. I think they've actually, there's not a proposed condition, but I think in their application they proposed some operating times, but I can't find them in the report. I'll have a look. Thank you.
Thank you.
So can I just check? So is it 24 hours, 7 days a week, or have they stipulated times?
Perhaps. Yeah. Director of Planning, could you please clarify?
So I was just having a quick look, Deputy Mayor. The item doesn't stipulate, so I think it's open and general access on the basis that that area is now zoned industrial effectively.
So it is 24 hours. Thank you. So the next question we have is from Mrs. Barriolo, and that is on item 13.2.3.
I'm going to go to question 2 first because I think question 1's going to be covered, will be covered in my actual statement. What I'm asking is the commercial vehicle parking should not exceed 15 as specified in tonight's report. So what my question is could that be made a condition that there would be 15 commercial vehicles, because we've had commercial vehicles and works going on the property all weekend without approvals.
Thank you, Mrs. Barriolo. I'll now hand it over to the Director of Planning to answer.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The plan only includes 15 parking bays for commercial vehicles. The council could reaffirm that with an extra condition if it chose to.
Thank you. Would you like to?
Thank you. If I may, and you're welcome to say no, I did put a question 3 there. Considering I didn't ask question 1, could I ask question 3?
Yes.
Thank you. Over the weekend, there's been considerable earth moving that's been going on the property. What my question is will council actually check the drainage of the property, because no drains were actually put in?
Thank you. I'll hand it over to the Director of Planning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, we will check.
Thank you. So the next question received is from Leon Walker. I have 5 questions here, and we will allow the 5 questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My first question is, what redress does a resident have if a councillor, without authorisation or payment, orders Domino pizza products in the name of the resident and has them delivered to the resident's home on a COD basis?
Thank you, Mr. Walker. I'll hand it over to the CEO to answer.
Madam Deputy Mayor, that seems like a hypothetical question, and if there's issues that needs to be raised with the police, it's not a Local Government Act matter.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Walker, you can read your next question.
Thank you. At the last OCM, Councillor Dewhurst made remarks about a person or persons apparently in the public gallery. What right of reply does a person or persons in the gallery have in this chamber to remarks made about them by Councillor Dewhurst?
The CEO will answer that question.
There is no direct right of reply, but obviously a question's been raised at this meeting about something that happened last meeting.
Is Councillor Dewhurst, and in fact every councillor, subject to the provisions of the Defamation Act 2005 in relation to things they say in this chamber?
The CEO will answer that question.
Madam Deputy Mayor, yes, they are. Defamation is an issue for councillors and they're not protected like at state or federal parliament.
Thank you. During debate on item 13.5.2 at the last OCM, Councillor Dewhurst said, and I quote, "I note some commentary this evening. It's from the same people that normally complain about everything about everyone," end quote. Are these remarks an adverse reflection on personal persons?
The CEO will answer that question.
They could be broadly seen as an adverse reflection on a general group of people, but not on a specific person.
Thank you. Given that Standing Order 7.18.3 states, quote, "A member is not to use offensive or objectionable expressions in reference to any member, employee or other person," end quote. Did Councillor Dewhurst's remarks during debate on item 13.5.2 at the last OCM breach standing orders?
The CEO will address that answer.
Thanks.
That was for council to determine at the last meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walker. I will now call Mr. Mark Irving to ask his questions. There are 8 questions, so we'll start with 3 questions and see how we're going for time. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. All my questions concern Amendment 184. Starting with question 1, am I allowed to do the preamble, provide the context? Yep. So question 1, compliance with State Planning Policy 3.6. I note that the question specifically concerns only the Central Mannington DCP in regard to that amendment, as the other DCPs listed are not infill development. In reply to my submission, the City states that it is not in dispute that State Planning Policy 3.6 advocates for the scope, timing and priority of infrastructure delivery to be identified in a DCPR. However, this policy provision was intended to be considered in the context of the uncertainty involved in the assembly of public purpose land. However, the actual policy specifically notes in section 4 that the application of mechanisms outlined in this policy, such as development contribution plans, may not be suitable for all development settings where the rate of development may result in difficulties to realise the intended infrastructure within the life of the DCP, and principles such as certainty and need nexus are difficult to establish. Infill development and regional areas experiencing slow growth rates are examples where the use of such mechanisms need to be considered with a degree of caution. Furthermore, section 610.6 of the policy also notes the lifespan of a DCP should be linked to completion of development or subdivision, and generally a maximum lifespan of 10 years applies. A lifespan of longer than 10 years will only be considered in limited circumstances, with the important caveat that justification for such a time frame can be demonstrated and linked to a capital works and staging program. So the question is, the Central Mannington DCP is an infill development where timing is uncertain and there is no detailed project works plan. This is acknowledged clearly in the original plan wording. So why, after 10 years and only 27% completion of the project, does the City still believe it complies with the State Planning Policy 3.6?
Thank you. I'll hand it over to the Director of Planning to answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Firstly, it's important to note that the State Planning Policy was drafted some years after the introduction of the DCP. The DCP was adopted in 2013 and the State Planning Policy in 2021. Nevertheless, the policy is the state's principal policy on coordinating land development across multiple land ownership as occurs in Central Mannington. Fundamentally, a works plan cannot be provided because individual land owners will decide when they wish to participate in new development and to voluntarily give up land which is required for necessary public purposes. And that's a fundamental flaw of state planning policy. Ultimately, the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage will determine the suitability of this amendment under State Planning Policy 3.6. It is as aligned with the policy as we could possibly make it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Irving, would you like to ask another question?
Yes, if I can go to question 2, increase in scope of works. In my original submission to the City, I saw clarity on the insertion of a new cost item in the DCP capital budget in 2020. This was the year that the City passed a 62% increase to the common infrastructure works. Part of this increase was attributable to a new cost item 3, works in existing roads, which has a budget of 2.243 million. The original DCP had only limited funding for traffic infrastructure works of 317k, of which only 60k was attributable to existing roads and the remainder to a new roundabout. So it's my contention that the review of the DCP in 2020 must have included new items of work, as it's frankly belief that the originally planned tasks could have cost estimates increased from $60,000 to $2.243 million. Section 6.2.5 of the State Planning Policy defines the scope of items of infrastructure in a DCP, and among other requirements of this section, it notes the scope of items should not be expanded to ensure the principle of certainty is upheld, unless any changes have been included in an amendment to the scheme and the required public consultation has been undertaken. So my question is, can you identify the tasks that now comprise the works and existing roads budget of $2.294 million in the 2020 estimates to confirm that there's been no increase in scope beyond the activities in the original DCP, and thus confirm that the DCP is compliant with the state planning policy?
Thank you, Mr Irving. I'll now pass it to the Director of Planning to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. With all due respect, the preamble isn't agreed from the point of view of the established DCP, and there has been no substantive increase in the scope of works. The difference arises because when the design of infrastructure, the infrastructure package for the area was refined to an 85% design standard, the description of infrastructure in the DCP was amended to provide further detail by differentiating between new roads and works in existing roads, but the plans remain consistent.
Thank you. Mr Irving, can I ask the next question go directly to the question rather than the preamble as well?
Look, that's fine. Can I perhaps just, rather than replay one of these questions, just add a follow-on question to the one I've just raised, and that really concerns the fact that because the city's contribution has been fixed upon the inception of the plan, there isn't the normal skin in the game, I guess, from my perspective, to ensure that the scope of works is maintained within the original intent. The essence or nub of my question was to have full transparency around the full scope of works in the original DCP that started with a $29 million CIW budget, and understand how that, when a better estimation was done, increased by 62%. Meanwhile, the council's contribution was fixed at...
Sorry, Mr Irving, just interrupt you there. Can I ask you to go directly to the question that you would like to ask?
I'm just checking to make sure the question makes sense without the... Okay. This is question 3. Why has the city not developed the staging plan as originally promised in the DCP to commence work and acquit the city's share of the common infrastructure works? This would ensure that a good percentage of work should be delivered earlier and that the city's contribution was not eroded by cost escalations.
Thank you. The Director of Planning can answer your question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The portions of works that can be delivered are really determined by the availability of land, and the availability of land is a function of the take-up rate, which is driven by market conditions. So we've already touched on the reason for timing uncertainty and the influence that it has on a work plan, because a works plan can't be provided with any certainty. But to address that variable, the city has undertaken a couple of particular exercises. Firstly, to undertake a development intentions survey of landowners to understand their appetite to redevelop within the known future and identify potential development hotspots. And this has actually given some indication of where roads and infrastructure might be able to be delivered in the short-term future. We also regularly approach landowners who control strategic land, which is potentially holding up future roads and parks. And that's the only way that we can effectively plan for the future, is to keep putting these options in front of our landowners. The construction of Brabourne Street, Vermouth Parade and Western Park are all examples of major infrastructure that's been delivered, and there's also significant land acquisition well underway for the creation of more important new assets, but that's all done in an opportunistic way rather than through a formal works plan.
So, Mr Irving, we've come to the 15-minute mark. So what we'll do, we'll take the rest of your questions on notice as in writing, and we'll respond in writing to you. Thank you. So we'll now move to item 6.2, the public statements, and I call Mrs Sandy Barriolo forward to make a public statement on item 13.2.3.
Thank you. Good evening. My statement tonight is on item 13.2.3. I would like to respectfully request Council to consider an amendment for the following reasons. 23 Victoria Road, Kenwick is 4,047 squares, of which 2,661 square metres are designated for hardstand, thus leaving 1,400 metres of sand, with 15 commercial vehicles being parked. I have sent a diagram for your reference and sincerely hope it conveys the point clearly where the house is on both sides. That's myself and my rear neighbour. The length of the adjoining fence line is 101 metres, and the back of the property will have 1,400 squares of exposed fine black sand, as you've seen in the photos. My garage is approximately 62 metres from the area where the sand is, and for the past 6 weeks our home and garage has been infiltrated constantly with sand. It's everywhere. It's under my garage doors, affecting our cars. My BMW, despite having 3 covers on it, is covered in sand. The area where the sand piles up is 75 metres approximately from my home. Furthermore, to the rear neighbour's house is also less. I have sent photos showing the continued influx of sand into my home. Unfortunately, this situation will only worsen, in my view, if Council does not consider an amendment to the covering of the sand or to convert the entire area into hardstand as it is a commercial vehicle parking. This will severely diminish our family's quality of life. My home is constantly coated in sand. My laundry becomes filthy from the dust. It never seems to settle due to the lack of coverage. Thus, we kindly request the entire area be covered with hardstand as dedicated in the attached site plan, including the rear section. Additionally, we would like the condition of 15 commercial vehicles noted, not an approximate amount. This exposed ground composed of sand and dust continually invades my home, damages our vehicles, permeates every space in our home. The sand seeps under the doors, it gets into my washing, my line gets covered in sand, it blows everywhere. Thankfully, at the moment it's wet, but once it becomes dry and not wet, it's going to make matters worse. We therefore seek an amendment to any necessary actions to cover the entire ground area and the condition that 15 commercial vehicles only. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Barriolo. I now call Leah Sislick of Martin forward to make her public statement.
Oh, sorry, it was already on. Good evening, Deputy Mayor, councillors and staff. I wish to speak on 13.2.1, the development application of sea containers, 347 Lot 12, Maddington Road, Orange Grove. 347 Maddington Road was sold in November 23. Given the applicant's wife, Mrs Lyons, is the Mayor of the City of Gosnells, who is also the joint owner of the property and has been an elected member since 2015-2016. Mrs Lyons would be well aware of all the City of Gosnells planning policies and guidelines. Why be non-compliant and submit a retrospective application? The Mayor should be leading by example and setting the standards for everyone. The six containers are from their old property in Victoria Road, Kenwick. According to the staff report for OCM 14th of March 2015, the subject application was submitted in response to a compliance action initiated by the City for the storage of sea containers on site and they were proposed to be used for the storage of building materials associated with the renovation of an existing dwelling, as well as the applicant's construction business. Another retrospective development application. 2 sea containers are proposed for a temporary period and will be replaced with a permanent outbuilding in the future. Why wouldn't an outbuilding development application go hand in hand? Accepting this retrospective application sets the example that anyone in the City of Gosnells can be non-compliant, apply for a retrospective application and have it approved because, well, you've already done it. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. We'll now move to Mrs Edmonds of Orange Grove.
Good evening and thank you. I ask you to refuse this retrospective application on item 13.2.1. Please vote against the staff recommendation. Please do not vote in accordance with the staff recommendation. Mr Lyons is the applicant. The property owners are Mr and Mrs Lyons, the Mayor and her spouse. The property has been in their joint ownership almost a year. Thus far, despite clearly being aware of non-compliance, neither party has submitted a development application. Before you decide how to vote tonight, consider carefully that this application is retrospective and from a property owner who is well versed in the planning process. A mayor is a key public official, a leader of council. The role requires integrity, trustworthiness, and accountability. These are the key qualities of any leader. A leader sets an example to others and does not join the fold of compliance doesn't apply to me. A sea container is a sealed unit designed to withstand secure, airtight storage at sea. These units are sometimes used to create dwellings. A sea container used as a dwelling has planning requirements, as does any other habitable space. On taking occupation of this property, the sea containers in question were relocated from the owner's previous property in Kenwick, where one was used for habitation. In 2014, the Kenwick property was the subject of a non-compliance complaint to the city, resulting in a retrospective application for sea containers. That application described the use as commercial use. A staff condition on this application states not to be used for habitation. The city has no way of ensuring this condition is met. Although the staff report does not mention it, at least one sea container, visible in the photographs, has doors, windows and an air conditioner. The photographs provide evidence with building materials that the sea container use is likely to be a continuation of the property owner's business activities on their Kenwick property previously. It's absurd to say 6 sea containers are needed for domestic use. Effectively, this is 7, as one is a double size. We have sea containers on our property, as do most of the rural properties. I know the volume that fits in a 6-metre unit. The cubic space in the unit is huge.
Sorry, just wrap it up. Thank you.
And will take a whole large house full of furniture plus domestic goods. Question yourself why this person is making a retrospective application after almost a year of occupation of this property. There is no development application for a shed. Despite their non-compliance and retrospective application for sea containers in their previous City of Gosnells property, the property owners moved these sea containers to this property, fully aware they would be non-compliant with the local planning policy. Please vote against the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Edmonds. We'll now move to the next public statement, and I call forward Mr. Mark Irving of Victoria Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My statement applies to agenda item 13.2.4, which is the Amendment 184. I answer the first question, why do I object just to the Maddington DCP, not just DCPs generally? A cynic would suggest that this is purely self-interest, which of course is true to some extent. Nobody would stand before council or be bothered to spend time researching these issues if they had no interest whatsoever. But it's more than that. The central point here is that Maddington is different from the other DCP areas. Let me explain this within the context of the principles of the state planning policy of equity, transparency, certainty, need and nexus that the regulation also supports. Equity, need and nexus can clearly be demonstrated when you examine the original DCAs for Canning Vale and Southern River. You'll note they comprised a small number of semi-rural large blocks at the inception of those schemes. It's classic greenfield. Land was acquired at rural and semi-rural valuations, and the landholder stood to benefit significantly if the land was converted to an urban environment. Of course, to convert semi-rural greenfields into urban requires power, roads, parks, other infrastructure, and it's only fair that those that are receiving the valuation gain pay the cost of unlocking that gain. It's the old maxim that those that have the pain should see the gain. That is equity. Need and nexus is also obvious. Large blocks cannot be converted to suburban blocks without roads, services and amenities. The fact that all landholders will unlock significant value from the development also ensures that they are motivated to proceed, and thus timeframes are shorter, providing certainty. Central Maddington is different. It's not greenfields, it's infill. There are only a few large super blocks, with the remainder a mixture of long-term residential zoning not too dissimilar from many other suburbs within the city. The majority of landholders have already paid a residential development valuation on their holding and already have access to roads and other infrastructure. They do not see the gain, but they feel the pain. This is not equity. There is also no need and nexus link for the majority of these landholders. They have the roads, they have the power, and the residential area and block sizes are similar to many others, such as in Gosnells, Kenwick and Beckenham. Even if there are some benefits in terms of road improvements, necessary upgrades to water, etc., there is not the certainty the planning policy in the city's own town planning scheme requires. Certainty in this context is related to the scope, timing and priority for delivering infrastructure items. Here we have no plan, there is no timeline. We are 10 years into the project with little show, and the only promise is there's another 20 or potentially 30 years more. To be fair, I don't think there is a desire not to drive the project faster by the city. The reality is they cannot control the timing. And that is why, fundamentally, and as recommended by the state planning policy, this infill development is simply not suitable, not aligned to the principles of the state planning policy. It's time to investigate the other options for funding as suggested by the state planning policy. State government, for example...
Sorry, Mr Irving, it's just come to the time of yours. If you'd just like to wrap it up with a final paragraph, a couple of sentences. Thank you.
My final point is to address what will happen if the amendment is not passed, with Maddington included. There are a number of arguments in the city's summary of my submission and in the detailed schedule that suggest the impact will be catastrophic, and thus some bending or generous interpretation of the regulations and the policy framework is required. The end justifies a means as a maxim, but good governance dictates that the means or how we achieve the ends matter, not just the end goal. I ask the councillors to keep this in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of public statements. I'll now move to item 7, confirmation of minutes. Can I get a mover, Councillor Baines, and a seconder, Councillor Good? And can you please cast your votes by show of hands? So that's been carried. Thank you. I'll now move to item 8, receiving of petitions and presentations. No, we do not have any tonight. Thank you. So that now brings me to item 9, applications for leave of absence. So I have one application here for Councillor Zhang She's seeking leave of absence for the meeting 27th of August 2024 for personal reasons. Can I get a mover for that item, Councillor Dewhurst, and a seconder, Councillor Abetz? Can you please, we'll go to the vote with a show of hands. So that's been unanimously carried. Thank you, councillors. We have item 10, no questions of which due notice has been given. And so we'll now move item 11. We will not be bringing any items forward for the convenience of the public gallery. So we'll now move to the first report, item 12.1, minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee meeting held on the 6th of August 2024. Can I seek a mover? Councillor Dalton, and a seconder, Councillor Islam. Would anybody like to speak to the item? No. So we'll go to the vote for that item by show of hands. So that's unanimously supported. Thank you. Okay, so the next item I have a financial interest in, so I will be vacating the chair, but before I vacate, I'll have to call for nominations from the councillors on who would like to chair the meeting.
I nominate Councillor Good.
Thank you, Councillor Abetz. Councillor Good, are you happy to accept that nomination?
Yes.
Yes. Councillor Dewhurst? You'll second, Councillor Good? Okay, so we will have to go to the vote for that.
Don't need to per se go to a vote. If there's no other nominations, then Councillor Good is... Oh, if there's another nomination, we can go to a vote.
Yep, so no other nominations from councillors? No? Okay, so Councillor Good will now come to the chair and chair the meeting. Thank you.
Councillors, good evening. I move on to item 13.2.1, Development Application Sea Containers, 347 Mountain Road, Orange Grove. I seek a mover. Councillor Islam. I seek a seconder. Councillor Baynes. Does anyone wish to speak to the item? Before Councillor Dewhurst, Councillor Islam, do you wish to speak first as the mover?
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a quick question, if I can ask the question. Question in relation to proposed condition 1. How does the city ensure that the applicant is complying with the condition if we actually support this recommendation?
Thank you, Councillor Islam. I'll ask Director Terrelling to answer that question, or Director Bradbrook will answer that question instead. Thank you, Director Bradbrook.
Thank you, Councillor Good. It would be a difficult condition to actually gain the evidence to see if someone was not complying with that condition. It would be fairly resource intensive, so it'd be quite a challenge, I guess, is the answer.
Thank you, Director Bradbrook. Councillor Islam, another question?
Yeah, I've got another question is, if there is a non-compliance on all these conditions, given the applicant is the elected members, what is the consequence or what is the next step if there is a non-compliance from the city?
Director Bradbrook.
Thank you, Councillor Good. Look, if regardless of who the applicant or the owner is, if there was evidence of non-compliance, the city would pursue compliance action as it would in any other circumstance.
Thank you, Director Bradbrook. Councillor, is there any further questions? Did you still wish to speak on the item? Because you've only asked questions, you can still speak if you wish.
No question or no statement, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Islam. Councillor Baynes, as a seconder, did you wish to speak before I go to Councillor Dewhurst? Councillor Dewhurst, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Acting Mayor. It's not sure how to put that. Look, I've got an amendment to the motion. I, Councillor Dewhurst, propose the following: that staff recommendation be amended by deleting condition 2, which reads, within 18 months of the date of approval, 2 temporary sea containers shall be removed from the property. The reason that is the condition is unnecessary, particularly given the sea containers are not visible from the street, barely visible from any adjoining properties. And I believe that council should concern itself probably with those things that adversely impact on the amenity of the surrounding landowners or cause environmental harm. The few sea containers on 1.5 hectare block in Orange Grove is not something that will impact many of the area of the surrounding landowners in this instance. I'm not saying that we do it all the time, but in this instance I don't believe it is. I also believe that we've all been striving.
Excuse me, Councillor Dewhurst, are you moving this amendment? Otherwise I need a seconder for you to speak on it.
Yeah, seconder.
You're moving it?
Yeah.
Excellent. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Betts? Please continue, Councillor Dewhurst.
Yeah, the reason I bring this up is because it's about cutting red tape and taking. What are we going to do in 18 months? We're going to check off on a calendar and say, well, let's go and look at the sea container, you know, and how much staff time can we put on that? We very rarely do that, but we have. In fact, I've never heard us ever doing that. So I think the condition has been put on there unnecessarily, and really they'll probably forget about it before then. But the applicant has also said that they're going to be removing the sea containers in 18 months, and we'll take it on that. But we've done a lot of retrospective approvals in and around the city. In fact, probably hundreds of retrospective approvals, and there's been no problem there. And there's always circumstances why this occurs. So I'd ask councillors to support the amendment, please.
Thank you, Councillor Dewhurst. Would Councillor Betts like to speak as a seconder? Does anyone wish to speak to the motion? To the amendment, I beg your pardon. In that case, councillors, I will put the amendment to the vote. Please raise your hands, all those in favour. That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The amendment has been carried. It's now become part of the substantive motion. Does anyone wish to speak further on the substantive motion? In that case, councillors, please cast your vote on the substantive motion. I declare that motion carried in full unanimously. Thank you very much. Would you please call in Deputy Mayor Williamson? For the record, Deputy Mayor Williamson, that motion was carried with the amendment. Thank you. The chair is now yours.
Thank you, Councillor Good. We'll now move to item 13.2.2, the development application, commercial vehicle parking, number 14, Bindoon Loop in Huntingdale. A second mover, Councillor Dewhurst, and a seconder, Councillor Good. Councillor Dewhurst, would you like to speak? Councillor Good, would you like to speak to the item? Would anybody else like to speak to the item? Councillor, yep, it's, yes. Councillor Betts.
That's regarding commercial vehicle parking. I'd just like to propose the following amendment, that the staff recommendation be amended by deleting condition 5, which reads that within 90 days of the date of approval, the garage roller door shall be removed to ensure the commercial vehicle can be parked wholly within the property, for the reason being that the removal of the roller door will diminish the amenity of the area, and the roller door can be left up for the truck to go in.
Thank you, Councillor Betts. Seconder, Councillor Dewhurst. Councillor Betts, would you like to speak to the item?
Yep, thank you. Just very briefly, the truck has to reverse in, and the tray will go into the garage, and for that to happen, obviously the garage door has to be up. But if the driver has a remote tag in the cab, he can just simply press that, the door opens, and he can go in at night when he parks the truck. But during the day when he's out, it will allow the garage door to be closed, and I think from an aesthetic point of view that looks much better than a dark cavity. So I think from an amenity point of view, I think it's more attractive, and it also, I think, is better security for the homeowner. So that's briefly the reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Betts. Councillor Dewhurst, would you like to speak to the item? Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Betts. Something I didn't think about it until I read your amendment. I think it would be actually make the place look ugly, because normally underneath these roller doors we have dirty grey lintels running across there, or something, you know, if it's been brickwork. I'm pretty sure it's brickwork by memory there, so it actually will, I believe taking that away will affect the amenity of the area, and makes common sense in be able to shut his door up, and I'm assuming through the garage you'll have a door going to his house, and also add extra security for that there. So I'd ask you to support Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Councillor Dewhurst. Would anybody else like to speak to this item? Councillor Good?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Williamson. Yes, I'm also in support of it, and whilst I didn't want to say too much, I'm totally concur with the comments by Councillor Betts and Councillor Dewhurst. But the fact of the matter is, so many garages and carports have got crates, shelving, and all bits and pieces of people. So if there's no roller door on and you're driving straight down, you can see everything. It does actually give you that privacy. I know that I'm like that. I've got crates and stuff and shelving, and I don't want the world to see everything. So fully support of the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Good. Would any other councillors like to speak to this item? No. I will actually be speaking on this item as well. I would like to speak against the amendment. I think this application came up because of a compliance issue with the truck parking on the footpath, and without the removal of the garage door, it may result in that truck actually not putting the garage door up again and parking out onto the footpath. So I don't support the amendment that's been proposed. But I will now put the amendment to the vote. So if you are in support of the amendment, could you please raise your hand? And so that is carried with 2 against and Councillor Islam and Councillor and myself against the item. Thank you. I'll now put the amendment together with the original motion, which removes that clause 5 from the amendment, from the original motion. Yep. So would anybody like to speak to this item? No? Okay, so we'll go to the vote by show of hands. So if you're in support of the original with the amendment. Yep, so that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so the next item is item 13.2.3, development application, transport depot and hard stand area, 23, lot 6, Victoria Road, Kenwick. Can I seek a mover? Councillor Adams is moving, and can I seek a seconder? Councillor Dalton. Councillor Adams, would you like to speak to this item? No. Councillor Dalton, would you like to speak? No. Would anybody else like to speak to this item? Councillor Abetz.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'd just like to move the following amendment, that the staff recommendation be amended to read as follows. 1, to amend the date in condition 1 to read 30th of June 2025, and add the following condition, number 8, that would be, the applicant provides soil stabilisation treatment to the non-trafficable portion of the site, which is 1,386 square metres, in the form of mulch or an approved alternate treatment to the satisfaction of the city. And the reason is that in relation to the duration of the development, the approval period should be amended to align with the time frame imposed on other recent development approvals for Precinct 1 of the Mooksy. These timeframes are to ensure the Mooksy Precinct 1 structure plan can be progressed once it's approved by the West Australian Planning Commission. And in relation to the condition 8, this is intended to ensure that dust from the undeveloped portion of the site does not become an issue for surrounding landowners. Do I have a seconder?
Thank you, Councillor Betts. Councillor Good, you're happy to second? Yes, Councillor Betts, would you like to speak to the item?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Basically, the cost for the landowner to, say, put mulch over that area would be minimal, because you can get mulch for free from the tree lopping people. So it's just a small job, but putting a good layer of mulch on there would just make it, once the soil dries out, it'll make it much better for the neighbourhood. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Betts. Councillor Good, would you like to speak to it? No. Would any other councillors like to speak to this item? Councillor Dewhurst?
Look, I'm in two minds. I mean, I'll go through the second part first in regards to the soil treatment. That's no brainer. We need to treat the soil if the dust is blowing around, like one of the people that made the statements made. I think we need to have a look at that, and whether it be mulch or something else. But we need to, I think we need to do that. But mulch isn't free anymore. So you're looking around $600 per truckload to get a small truck of mulch. We try and get mulch all the time. So, but the only thing that concerns, the first thing that, so I agree with totally number two. Number one, I've got some reservations about. Yes, I do believe that we should make it to the 30th of June 2025, because that's our standard. We've been looking at that. But some of these conditions 5 and 6 about, yes, we need a landscaping design, but how much money they're going to put into that, I think we need to be reasonable, because it's only going to be for 12 months. Putting in substantial trees and that, which if they probably get sold to a developer or something like that, it will be quite an expensive exercise.
Councillor Betts?
Councillor Dewar is actually speaking to the whole motion. This is actually to my amendment, is it not?
Yes.
Yeah, so just purely my amendments you should be speaking to. But you're actually suggesting something extra, which is not in the amendment.
I'll allow Councillor Dewhurst to continue as he's speaking about the date that's on the amendment.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that, Deputy Mayor, because that's the only concern I've got about the first one. Yes, I agree with the date, no problems at all, because that's the standard we've set. But what does concern me is the other things, the ramifications for that. So I don't know how we could, do we need to make an amendment to make sure we don't cost this guy an arm and a leg for this 12 months, or Deputy Mayor, should we ask through yourself to the Director of Planning that they would take that on board themselves? Just like to seek your advice on that, or the advice of the CEO.
Thank you, Councillor Dewhurst. I'll just be one moment. Thank you, Councillor Dewhurst. The CEO will provide a response.
Councillor Dewhurst, I understand what you're saying. I think it's, I think if council adopts the conditions, then they are the conditions. I think if there are particular conditions that are considered onerous in light of a revised timeframe, which then we need to probably identify them tonight and sort of suggest they not occur. So that can be another amendment.
Thanks very much for that. So what I'll do then is we'll deal with this amendment, then I'll bring an amendment up in regards to that. But in that amendment, I would like to seek advice from my fellow councillors, what they seem reasonable as well.
Would you like to adjourn for 5 minutes, Councillor Dewhurst, so you can get advice?
That'd be wonderful.
Yes. So you need to do a procedural motion?
If you can adjourn, procedural motion.
Or deal with the amendment first?
Depends how you want to play it. We can deal with the amendment first. If that doesn't get passed, then yeah, it's probably best to do it that way.
Okay. Councillor Dewhurst, are you happy if we deal with the amendment first? Okay. So would anybody else like to speak to the amendment? No? Okay, so we'll go to the vote on Councillor Betts's amendment, and that's to amend the date in condition 1 to read 30 June 2025 and to that add the following condition to Condition 8, the applicant providing soil stabilisation treatment to the non-trafficable portion of the site in the form of mulch or an approved alternative treatment to the satisfaction of the city. Before we actually go to the vote, Councillor Betts, did you want to close on the amendment? No. Okay, so we can move to the vote on the amendment. So if you're in support of the amendment, can you please raise your hand? So that's been unanimously carried. Okay, so Councillor Dewhurst, would you like to do a procedural motion to adjourn for the 5 minutes? Okay, so you've moved that. Councillor Betts, you second that. We'll need to go to the vote for that. So councillors, if you're in support of that, raise your hands. So we have unanimous support for that. Thank you. So we will adjourn for 5 minutes and come back at 8:04. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone in the gallery, for your patience. We'll now reopen the meeting. Do we need to No? Okay, so we can just go straight to this item again. Would anybody like to speak to this, the original motion? Councillor Dewhurst.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Thanks for everybody's patience as well. Look, on the break, we held a discussion and we believe that, and I believe that the city can actually work within their guidelines and we don't really need an amendment or a motion for number 5. So the city will be reasonable noting that there's only a 12-month approval process here. But I do have an amendment to the motion.
Thank you, councillor.
Yep.
You can speak to that. Oh, well, you can move that.
Move that.
Thank you.
So I'd like to move the motion that we delete condition number 6. That's within 120 days of approval, the landscaping irrigation plan, the subject site is to be installed in accordance with the approved landscape plan, therefore maintain the satisfaction of the City of Gosnells. The reason for that is that it's actually covered in point 5, where number C is for details of proposed irrigation. And we're sure that, and I'd like to get a seconder if I could.
Yep, councillor Betts will second that item. Councillor Dewhurst, if you speak to the amendment.
The reason is I thought the conditions were certainly reasonable over a 2-year period, but I believe that it really is very costly for someone to do what we're asking them to do, particularly if we are going to ask them now to maintain the back part of the property where the sand's blowing around as well. I just think it's fair. It's fair and reasonable. It shouldn't affect anybody at all, and I'm sure the city will still maintain that 3-metre buffer at the front where they will have to put something down, and to make it look reasonable, because we certainly don't want to have ugly blocks sitting out there. So I would ask you to support the amendment to the motion of removing number 6, because most of it's carried in number 5.
Thank you, councillor Dewhurst. Councillor Betts, would you like to speak to the amendment? No? Would any other councillors? Councillor Lloyd?
I just wanted a point of clarification. So what we're saying here is that we're going to leave in 5, which says within the 60 days they have to submit this plan for planting, but then remove the requirement for them to actually install it. Is that correct?
I'll seek guidance on that. Thank you. Director of Planning will address it. Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Deputy Mayor. Yeah, that's not the intention is that they install it, but they wouldn't need a full-blown, super expensive irrigation system. They'd just be covered under Part C of Condition 5. But just looking at your question, I can see how you've raised that question. So you might need a couple of extra words.
Councillor Dewhurst, would you like to make an amendment to your amendment?
ABC, we'll put a D there. Sorry about the people that are typing this up, but we'll put a D in there that it must be implemented within 120 days.
Yes, thank you. So that will now have the item D, which is within 120 days of approval. It will be installed. Thank you. Councillor Dewhurst, Councillor Lloyd, would you like to speak to the item? No? Would anybody else like to speak to the item or have any questions? No? Okay, so we'll put the amendment up, Councillor Dewhurst's amendment. We'll put that to the... Oh, Councillor Dewhurst, would you like to close? No? We'll put the amendment up to the vote, so please raise your hand if you're in support of the amendment. So that's unanimously carried. Thank you. So we'll now put the 2 amendments together with the original motion. And would anybody like to speak to the original motion? No? And, sorry, just a moment. Councillor Adams, you moved this item. Would you like to close the item? No. Okay. So we'll now put the original motion with the 2 amendments to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're in support of the motion. That's been unanimously carried. Thank you, councillors, and thank you to the gallery for your patience. We'll now move to item 13.2.4, the scheme amendment number 184 to Town Planning Scheme number 6, Development Contribution Plans Finalisation. Can I seek a mover, Councillor Abetz, and a seconder, Councillor Islam? Councillor Abetz, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, we've heard from... sorry, I've forgotten the name. Mr. Irvine. Mr Irvine, thank you. While I sympathise with some of the issues that he's raised, the fact is the city has contributed or is contributing or is committed to contribute $10 million towards the infrastructure, and for this area to be developed, it's absolutely essential that there be a development contribution scheme. Otherwise, this area will not be able to be developed in an appropriate sort of way. And while this may prolong while the period over which this scheme will operate is longer than the normal 10 years, that's just simply part of the reality of life when you're dealing with those situations. And the fact that the state planning policy says they should be for 10 years or not more than 10 years is just one of those things where the policy's been made without due regard for the practical realities on the ground. And so I think that we certainly, the other two DCPs, I think nobody's arguing about those, but the one for Maddington, while it is a dragged out kind of situation, I don't see any other way of actually ensuring that this area gets developed in an appropriate way and where the costs are actually shared fairly. And some people have already contributed towards the common infrastructure costs. So how could you work that out if you didn't continue it? That would be quite unfair to those people. So I think we just have to live with the fact that we've got a system that doesn't quite match up with what the state government policy says, but they don't really give us an alternative. So I would encourage people to support the staff recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Abetz. Councillor Islam, would you like to speak? No. Would any other councillors like to speak to the item? No. I'll now put the item to the vote. So there's staff recommendation 1 and 2. I'll put them to the vote together. So if you're in support of both of those, please raise your hand. And that's carried. Thank you. So the next item is item 13.3.1, the Thornley Neighbourhood Centre Expressions of Interest for Tenancy. Can I seek a mover? Councillor Good, and a seconder, Councillor Baines. Councillor Good, would you like to speak to this item? Councillor Baines? No. Would any other councillors like to speak to this item? No. So we'll now go to the vote on this item. If you're in support of the item, please raise your hand. And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll now move to item 13.5.1, the Financial Activity Statement for July 2024. Can I seek a mover? Councillor Islam and Councillor McDonald as a seconder. Councillor Islam, would you like to speak? No. Councillor McDonald, would you? No. Would any other councillors like to speak to the item? No. Okay, we'll now go to the vote on this item. If you're in support of the item, could you please raise your hand? So that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now brings us to the next item, 13.5.2, Payment of Accounts, July 2024. Can I seek a mover? Councillor Good and Councillor Lloyd as a seconder. Councillor Good, would you like to speak? No. Councillor Lloyd? No. Would anybody else like to speak? Councillor Dewhurst.
I've got just got a question, and can be taken offline if you want to, but just taking into account of most businesses and people are paying a lot of money now. For instance, costs have gone up. Steel's gone up nearly 50% over the last 2 years, or actually 60% over the last 2 years. Other assets have gone up quite considerably. How are we actually? I mean, look on paper it looks good where we're coping, but are we diving into our reserves? I mean, bearing in mind, rates are at 4%, and I mean, how are we adjusting it? What's the go? We got a pot of cash somewhere, or
Efficiency.
Yeah.
Director of Business Services will answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We're coping through very good financial management, Councillor Dewhurst, but look, a lot of the contracts where we had significant increases were awarded prior to us putting the budget together, so we were able to include those costs within our budget for this year, particularly those that are on the operating side. There are a number of capital projects that are funded through reserves, but those reserves have been set aside for that purpose. That's why they were established, so it's perfectly reasonable to use the reserves for that purpose. In fact, that's all they could be used for. So, yeah, a large chunk of our capital budget is funded through state and federal government grants, reserves, and only a relatively small proportion is actually funded through rate revenue raised in this year. So that is how we're making the numbers add up.
Thank you. Councillor Dewhurst, would you like another question?
Yeah. Have we seen the sign where, for instance, iron ore's gone down, and that's our cash cow in WA and particularly around Australia as well? And if iron ore continues to drop, these signs concern me, but as a council, are we sort of watching this, because could you see government actually stop handing out those grants? And what more or less I'm trying to say is, are we preparing, or are we at least monitoring or looking at the worst case scenario where, you know, I mean, money's going to be tight. It's going to be very hard in the future, for the foreseeable future. Are we robust enough to keep an eye on it?
The CEO will answer the question. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, look, certainly financial assistance grants which we get from the Commonwealth, and obviously the Commonwealth's impacted by iron ore royalty prices as well, have been going down historically over many years, and the Australian Local Government Association's campaign to bring them back to 1%. They're currently at around 0.5% of Commonwealth taxation. But we are a minimum grant council, so we only get Commonwealth grants based on our population anyway, so there's no redistribution towards us. More like, and it's the Commonwealth that gives us the direct grants. Effectively, while we talk about we've been successful in getting road grants and others, they could all go if there's less state revenue, but I don't see any immediate sort of loss of grants, and indeed much of the state will still, and the Commonwealth will still want to provide funding to projects because it's good for Australia and it's good for governments. So I think we're in as good a position as we can be, and it's probably because of some very good financial management by certain people. But look, it's something we're mindful of, but we are certainly not. The cold winds aren't going to blow on us quickly in that space like others. So, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Good.
Yeah, point of order, Mr. CEO. You're giving compliment to the management fund. I think you should need a Lotto Slick Pick 25 for this Saturday, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Good. Would anybody like to speak to this item or any further questions? No? We'll then go to the vote on this item. Who moved it? Councillor Good, would you like to close before we go to the vote? No. Okay. We'll now go to the vote. So please raise your hand if you're in support. Thank you. That's being carried unanimously. Thank you. And that brings us to the end of the agenda. And we have no motions of which previous notice has been given. We have no urgent business. We have no confidential items. So that brings us to the closure at 8:17. Thank you very much. Thank you.